The Walt Disney Company had its last earnings call on Wednesday, May 10th, and shortly thereafter, well, they got sued again. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's great to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and hit that little red subscribe button and turn it to gray. Hit that notification bell, hit that like button, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. And so here we are from the article on Deadline magazine. The Walt Disney Company and the ex-CEO Bob Chapek and CFO Christine McCarthy have been hit with a shareholder suit, a lawsuit over streaming losses. Now, what's interesting about this to note is that, honestly and unfortunately, this is relatively common in the investment world. Bad quarterly earnings reports typically, more often than not, can engender some type of class action lawsuit or an attempt at a class action lawsuit by certain groups of shareholders. Not all shareholders, but those who sign on to create the suit. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily right or wrong, just to note that this is not a terribly uncommon occurrence. But let's read from the article. To paraphrase Neil Young, Bob Chapek is gone from Disney but not forgotten. A shareholder is suing the former CEO, Bob Chapek, along with former executive Kareem Daniel, who, as you may recall, was Bob Chapek's right hand at Disney while he was there, along with current Chief Financial Officer Christine McCarthy, and the company itself, Disney, of course, alleging violations of securities law for misleading statements about Disney Plus and the health of the streaming business. Filed on May 12th, that would be just 2 days after the earnings report. The suit by Local 272 Labor Management Pension Fund, that's a labor union, filed in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, seeks a lead plaintiff for a class action representing purchasers of Disney shares between December 10th, 2020 and November 8th, 2022, when the company dramatically missed earnings guidance and the stock took a major hit after an already bumpy year. Now, right off the bat, I find a little interesting that this suit is prior to Bob Iger's return, about 12 days prior to Bob Iger's return, as it were. So don't worry about the purchasers of the Walt Disney shares after November 8th, when Bob Chapek left, just the ones before. Because as a reminder, Disney has lost streaming subs since then. Disney Plus has also accumulated additional losses since then, and the stock has retreated as well since then. Seeking a jury trial, the defense complaint alleges defendants through the class period made false and or misleading statements and or failed to disclose that, number one, Disney Plus was suffering decelerating subscriber growth, losses, and cost overruns. 2, the true costs incurred in connection with Disney Plus had been concealed by Disney executives by debuting certain content intended for Disney Plus initially on Disney's legacy distribution channels. Those would be linear broadcast channels, and then making the shows available on Disney Plus thereafter to improperly shift costs out of Disney Plus segments. 3, Disney had made platform distribution decisions based not on consumer preference, consumer behavior, or the desire to maximize the size of the audience for the content as represented, but based on the desire to hide the full costs of building Disney Plus's content library. And 4, Disney was not on track to achieve even the reduced 2024 Disney Plus paid global subscriber and profitability targets. Such targets were not achievable, and such estimates lacked a reasonable basis in fact. Specifically, the 39-page filing cites a November 8th earnings miss by Disney in its quarterly financial results, including, quote, a monumental operating loss of $1.47 billion for streaming. Disney also reported a decline in its average revenue per Disney Plus subscriber. Now, of course, on November 8th was an earnings call for Disney at that time, for the final fiscal quarter of 2022. And perhaps that's why they wanted to cut it off then. But as I stated earlier, there have been additional losses of both subscribers and in operating income since that point. Now, Disney finally responded to this a day later. Quote, "We are aware of the complaint, and we at Disney intend to defend vigorously against it in court," a Walt Disney spokesperson told Deadline today. Currently, the action from Local 272 seeks a judicial determination to become a class action, plus a slew of unspecified damages. And to Deadline's credit, they correctly point out what I prefaced this article with, and that is that attempted class action lawsuits are filed frequently when share prices fall sharply, particularly after an earnings call, and they often don't advance. If you follow us here on Valiant Renegade and you've watched us cover live some of these earnings calls, there's something that happens at the beginning of each and every earnings call. It's called a compliance disclosure, and that compliance disclosure goes something like this. This earnings call may contain forward-looking statements. These statements are not statements of fact or are guarantees of future results. Basically, what forward-looking statements are is a company's projection of goals, things they want to achieve, things they think that will happen downrange, but they always stipulate at the beginning and the end of these earnings calls that such forward-looking statements should not be taken as gospel truth. These are what they are intending to do, but they may not come to fruition. In other words, historical performance is no guarantee of future results. And frankly, if I'm the Walt Disney Company, that's exactly one of the first counter-arguments I would make to this case. Of course, it was always Disney's goal to hit certain subscriber levels by the end of fiscal year 2024, which, by the way, in case this lawsuit might have forgotten, we're still about 18 months away from the end of fiscal year 2024 at this point. Disney still has a long runoff. Now, granted, the subscriber losses that they suffered, as they state in the suit, nearly 5 million in this past quarter alone, a lot of those have been attributed to non-core subscribers, meaning Disney Hotstar or Disney Plus in India. We knew that they would be losing subscribers once Disney chose not to renew the streaming rights to the IPL, the cricket league over there. And that's a big draw in India. But going back, I think it was still a wise decision for Disney, because as this suit continues to complain about is the losses mounting on Disney Plus. At that point last year when the auction came up, the IPL separated the streaming rights for the broadcast of those cricket games. One package included broadcast in India, and another package included streaming rights in India. Disney acquired those rights from the Fox purchase back several years ago to the tune of about almost $80 billion. And one thing, as I've mentioned many times here before, is noteworthy, is that the broadcast rights, even to this day, are still far more lucrative than the streaming rights, because linear broadcast in India still reaches vastly more households than does streaming. Had Disney decided to buy the streaming rights as well, it would have cost them an extra $3 billion almost by the time the auction was done. So if right now we're complaining about an accumulated loss of Disney Plus north of $12 billion, imagine if it were 15 or 16 billion. That's what would have happened if Disney Plus had done that, and we all know how much revenue that India brings into Disney in terms of ARPU, or average revenue per user. It's about $1 a month. It's a mere tiny fraction of that, of what they get here in the North American market and on many Western European markets. And one of the other things to remember about Disney Plus is where many of these losses have been achieved. And that is the fact that the Disney company has been consuming all of its own major theatrical content since just after 2019. They had deals with Netflix up to that point that was bringing in billions of dollars in third-party licensing revenue to the Walt Disney Company until they turned off the spigot, because at that point, Disney wanted to make sure that they fed the beast as much as possible, and that new beast name was Disney Plus. Now think back to that point when Wall Street wanted subscriber growth. They were hungry for it, and when we say Wall Street, we're talking about major institutional investors of big Fortune 500 companies, big publicly traded companies, companies like Disney. So if folks like Vanguard and BlackRock and State Street and American Funds and T. Rowe Price and let's go on down the list were all clamoring for their company, the Walt Disney Company, who they are shareholders of, among many, many others, for them to grow once Disney decided to enter the streaming market, well, Disney had to abide by their stockholders' wishes. And since the pandemic-era lockdown gave a lot of these streaming companies massive, explosive overnight growth, goals were set in many of these streaming companies rather high. Well, that didn't quite happen in the way that they thought it would, but that's forward-looking guidance. That's something that you can't guarantee. But to be fair, there have been institutional investors and analysts that have called in during earnings reports. One even asked about a year ago, why is Disney spending this much on content? We, the investors, the analysts at places like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, so on and so forth, thought that the Disney Plus could launch and be successful with its own existing library, that it wouldn't require billions upon billions of dollars of new capital investment to create new proprietary products. But that's exactly what Disney did. And what's even more is that after canceling those contracts with places like Netflix for third-party distribution of, say, the Marvel Cinematic Universe titles that were in theaters, Disney started consuming those on their own. So not only did they lose the billions of dollars of revenues that they otherwise would have enjoyed from places like Netflix, Disney was now banking billions of dollars of expenses to Disney Plus to effectively license their own content to themselves. To put it simply, Disney was writing itself checks to itself. They were writing checks from Disney Plus for, say, $150 million to license and distribute on Disney Plus Thor: Love and Thunder, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, Black Widow, Shang-Chi, The Eternals, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and now Guardians of the Galaxy. You can add down the list later this year things like Little Mermaid. You can add into that the Marvels, or how about Elemental coming out this summer? How about some of the other animated features from last year like Lightyear, which tanked at the box office, and Strange World that did absolutely nothing? Yes, Disney Plus effectively writes a check from that business enterprise, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, over to the distribution wing, or to the studios like Lucasfilm, Marvel, Pixar, so on and so forth. That's where a lot of those losses have racked up. Disney should probably take a note from Universal's playbook and do a split pay one window, where Universal puts the first 4 months of things like Puss in Boots, Minions Rise of Gru, and soon to be the Super Mario Bros. Movie on Peacock, followed by a 10-month window over on places like Netflix and Amazon Prime, before returning home to Peacock for the end of the pay one window, and then in many cases, going right back to Netflix. Netflix and Amazon Prime pay billions and billions of dollars over the course of time to license that content. Disney's gotten greedy and is keeping it all home, and they've not turned a profit yet on Disney Plus to justify it. And when you look at a swing of, say, losing $2 to $3 billion, maybe $3 to $4 billion over the course of the last 4 years or so since Disney Plus launched, versus making $3 to $4 billion in third-party licensing content, well, that's a swing of $6 to $8 billion for the Walt Disney Company in terms of operating income. That's a big number over the course of a few years. But the key is, did Disney actually do this maliciously? No, probably not. Let's be fair about this. I know we love to pick on Disney when they do really stupid things, but this is probably not one of them. I think that Disney was acting in the best faith of what they thought the Wall Street analysts, and more importantly, the Wall Street investors really wanted, because that's exactly what they were clamoring for. If you don't believe me, go back and look through financial headlines for the last several years, up until maybe about 6 to 8 months ago. How many subs did you get this quarter? How many subs are you going to get next quarter? Never actually looking at profitability. Disney was probably doing, just like all these other streaming services were doing, spending money to get more subs, because that's what they were told investors wanted. Now, big enterprises like streaming services always take years to come to profitability. Paramount Plus, Peacock, a lot of these things, they're still not profitable yet. They're still probably a couple of years away from profitability. And Disney taking small shows off of Disney Plus exclusively and putting them onto linear broadcast, not to hide maybe some paltry marketing budget for these kind of things, but at least to try to drive more positive advertising revenue, something that wasn't really on Disney Plus at that point. Bear in mind, the Walt Disney Company did not take headline Disney Plus exclusive content, like, for instance, The Mandalorian or Marvel Cinematic Universe titles, and move them onto linear broadcast. No, they all had exclusive long-term windows on Disney Plus, and that's where the bulk of production and the bulk of marketing went to. Not for some of these little piddly-dunk shows that are actually mentioned as examples in the lawsuit itself. So I don't know how far this one's really going to go, but it's interesting and it's something that we need to discuss because it does show quite clearly some of the failures of Disney over time and how they managed the streaming service. And now, joining me for his expert legal opinion is my good buddy Andrew Esquire from Legal Mindset, talking about this Disney stockholder suit. What are your thoughts given the particulars of this case?
Yeah, so this is a case that obviously we have right now as the stock is bombing for a number of reasons, and we have it amidst, other lawsuits that Disney is embroiled with. So right now, Disney has massive incentive to settle. So this is something that is absolutely intended to receive a settlement or to receive at least a payout. And by the way, from a plaintiff standpoint, from a legal standpoint, if you get what you're asking for, get a fraction of what you're asking for, you're typically happy, you're typically all right. And there are plenty of law firms out there that are willing to go in there, push at the right time, and go for that settlement. So when I think of what they're looking for, yes, they're looking for a settlement. Now, does it have merit? Yes, it has enough merit not to be outright dismissed. And that's the key here. When you want a settlement, when you're aiming for a settlement, you want enough meat on the bone that you're not going to get blown out by a motion to dismiss, right? And by the way, that is a very hard standard, whether you're in California, whether you're in Florida, wherever else. It is a hard standard to get blown out in a motion to dismiss, but this one has enough meat on the bone to be able to escape that. And then you go into discovery and then summary judgment. And that's typically the period at which you see a settlement happen. So absolutely 100%, I think this is angled for that, because if you look at it, yes, it's got some legitimate claims that could have merit if there's more discovered behind them. If they looked into Bob Chapek's statements, if they looked into the statements of Walt Disney regarding what they were going to do regarding Disney Plus, and also more lethally for them is this cooking of the books narrative, which is really something that I know you've talked about a little bit on your channel and we've heard about elsewhere, is how are they massaging the numbers? How were they dealing with those line items? Were they taking advertising and marketing numbers, which is something alleged in the complaint, and kind of taking those costs that would fall on Disney Plus if it was a separate line item and shifting it over to legacy, right? Shifting it over elsewhere, because according to the complaint, Bob Chapek divided the company essentially in two, one side for media, one side for parks. So kind of just slush funded everything together. So when they're reporting on Disney Plus, they could report on it in a rosy fashion. So those are the types of things that I think have enough meat on the bone to survive motion to dismiss. Now, if it went to a trial on the merits, that might be much tougher to prove, because you've actually got to prove fraud. You've got to prove some level of intention, some potential knowledge, or scienter, which they talk about in the complaint. And that's often a difficult thing to prove at trial. But is it enough for summary judgment? Absolutely 100%.
I'm thinking, kind of devil's advocate here. How would Disney defend this?
And that's the trial, right? Yeah, they have a defense. And I'm not saying Disney has no defense here. Disney, in this case, actually has a pretty solid defense. If this went to trial, they would have a really good chance to win. I think Disney could win at trial. The difference is, and the problem is here, these suits are very costly, and Disney, especially of all companies, does have a history of settling. So I think this is something that may actually end up in a settlement. When I'm being very pragmatic about what the real true objective of this is, it's really a settlement, because from a shareholder standpoint, look, you're just attempting to recoup value, to get that nexus, right, to close that gap that you lost there. So that's if they're able to recover that through a settlement and say, hey, look, we're just going to pay you out here, go away, I think that's a win-win for Disney. However, it does encourage those types of suits in the future. And like you said, this is why they're common, because in the past, other groups have achieved settlements, not just with Disney, but with other companies as well. And because of that, they're going to continue to happen in the future, as things proceed. Now, do I estimate this is the last for Disney? No, certainly there's many other fully legitimate causes that may crop up in the future in terms of shareholder suits against Disney, particularly as they move forward in their Florida litigation. But that's an entirely separate subject for an entirely different day. These pension funds put together do aggregate for a very large amount of not just that stock, but many other stocks. So it sets a precedent. Remember, when something happens to Disney or Disney does something, it sets an industry standard. When I worked as in-house counsel, we would look at what Disney did. We would say, hey, what did Disney do here? What happened to Disney? What was their take on this? And then we would modify usually what they did or react to it or bounce off of it. But Disney was like a tent pole, right? They were something that you look to in the industry. So when you look at these lawsuits and you look at what's happening at Disney, these are likely to happen to other streaming services, right? If their numbers go bad or they make misrepresentations. However, I will say that I think there are some unique facts that are unique to Disney. I mean, particularly regarding some of the shows. And like you said, with the advertising and the way they were doing those numbers, I think that's a little bit more specific. If it was just a lawsuit that was saying, okay, well, they promised us a net positive of, I think, 1.7 million this quarter, right? And instead they went down 4 million. So analysts were expecting plus 1.7, and then they went down 4. So that's a net of negative 5.7.
More or less.
If it was just that, that's not a great case, right? That alone is not a great case. You have to add facts to it that give more knowledge, that give more a forethought to that, and also make it more of a material misrepresentation. Because once again, this is a securities suit, right? So this is violation of federal securities law. So you're going to have more meat on the bone than saying, hey, we hope that we're going to get this much and then screw up. That's just business, right? So if you say, look, I project that my business will sell $1 million in coconuts, and then you just end up going into debt and going broke because there's a coconut virus, right? I mean, you know what I mean? You can't, it is what it is, right? You know,
that's the forward guidance aspect, right? It's always, look, historical performance is never a promise of future results.
Yes.
And to be fair, and that's one of the things, and you did a great video the other day on this, and you showed the actual suit document. And one of the things that, as I watched your video, that my eyes caught on to was the complaint about exactly what you just said about the loss of subscribers that was reported in the recent quarter. Disney Hotstar India is what lost 5 million subs this quarter. It wasn't the core. Now, to be fair, North America Disney Plus, which is we can call it, this is my terminology, the super core, right?
Right.
They did lose 300,000. Now, they picked up another million internationally-ish in that range. But they lost 5 million in India. So that's where that net loss came from, and that's what I continue to remind folks. Look, yes, they lost subs. No, it's not good. But to be fair, based on the numbers, let's stipulate and be very clear where those losses came from was the lowest revenue, the lowest value subscribers, the lowest financial value subscribers, I should say.
In India.
In the Disney Plus, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, once again, the prices in India versus in America. Look, I can tell you right now, even, being abroad, I'm in Thailand right now, I'm in Korea often. It's kind of funny when I travel country to country and I, tap into the, my local, let's say I'm using my Thai, cell phone to buy the exact same app, right? It's, the price is much different, right? So you're talking about had international arbitrage. They're kind of setting a price that's reasonable for the local market, right? Yeah. Obviously, Hotstar is not going to be the same as your core demographic, which actually may be more troubling for Disney, because if you look at what the probably highest margin, aka the United States and Western countries, Anglosphere countries, that's really going to get you your highest margin, and you're losing customers there, that actually may be very much cause for concern, because that's your highest margin. Those million subscribers you get internationally, well, if they're in Central African Republic, frankly, they're probably not paying as much as your core demographic, right, in the United States. So there's a lot going on there, in that, and also, acquiring new folks versus losing long time, people who are really dedicated to the Disney economy. I think not everybody is created equal. That's something the left has a problem with, and a lot of other folks have. But to be frank, from a dollars and cents standpoint, yes, a customer that is paying $9.99 or $19.99 or whatever else is worth more just from a dollars and cents point than somebody paying 25 cents or 50 cents.
That's not far off from what India is actually paying. Yeah.
When you convert it over into rupees, right, it probably is close to that per customer. So you really have to think about that. And that's not a derogatory sense. Look, I travel a lot. I've been to these countries. I love living abroad. That's saying that with love, but I'm saying it just isn't equal. So I think the loss for Disney in America is critical, and I don't think that should be understated. And by the way, that certified class, as you mentioned, cutting off on election day, that's actually very smart because it preserves their ability to sue and certify a future class that goes into the future, let's say into 2023, 2024.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, so that preserves that. So that same law firm can file the exact same complaint, and it can go from that date, right, from starting on November 9th or whatever it is until May 16th, right, 2023. So they can recertify a class for another period. That's the magic of lawsuits and legal procedure. So I absolutely love it.
Well, there you go. Andrew, thank you for joining us, and stick around. We've got more to cover. And for those of you who are not subscribed, please go check out Andrew Esquire on The Legal Mindset on YouTube and on Twitter as well. We appreciate you being here, sir.
Always a pleasure. Peace.
Take care.